a soul trapped in purgatory for 700 years. Not for murder, not for heresy, not even for adultery or apostasy, but for something almost everyone does daily. Something so common, so socially accepted, that to call it a sin almost feels ridiculous. And yet, this man had been burning for 7 centuries, and when Saint Bridget saw him, his suffering was far from over. It was a revelation that overturned everything she thought she knew about divine justice. And everything we think we understand about sin. It was not the size of the sin that mattered. It was something else entirely, something that multiplied a small fault into a massive spiritual debt. This mystery, hidden from ordinary people but known to mystics, theologians, and saints, still echoes through 6 centuries of forgotten warnings. Today, you will see what Bridget saw, and you will begin to understand why some souls pass quickly through the flames and why others linger for what seems like eternity. Before we go deeper into this mystery, take a moment to engage with this journey. If you're watching this and it's stirring something inside you, if you're intrigued by the idea that a single ordinary sin could lead to centuries of purification, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss stories like this. Drop a comment below with where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there. It's always humbling to see souls from across the globe reflect on these mysteries together. And if you find this story as unsettling and fascinating as we do, share it with someone else who may never have considered that everyday choices have eternal consequences. Let's see how many people truly understand the mystery hidden in this title. Now, to understand what Saint Bridget saw, we must first understand who she was. Saint Bridget of Sweden was not a naive visionary in the woods, nor a cloistered nun lost in dreams. She was born into nobility in 1303, a daughter of the elite, educated in Latin and scripture, raised in a world of politics, royal courts, and ecclesial power. She married a nobleman, Ulf Gudmarsson, and together they raised 8 children, including Catherine, who would later be canonized herself. Bridget's first 30 years were spent as a wife, a mother, and a counselor to queens. She was summoned to advise the Swedish court, and often spoke boldly to rulers and bishops. But everything changed after her husband's death in 1344. That was when the visions began. They came not in whispers, but in images and voices, detailed and vivid. Christ and the Virgin Mary appeared to her repeatedly. They showed her visions of heaven and hell, of purgatory, and of the fate of individual souls. She asked questions. They answered, and she wrote down every word. These revelations weren't brushed aside. They were submitted to theologians, examined by cardinals, even studied at major councils like Basel and Constance. Multiple popes corresponded with her. Bishops sought her advice. Her writings were carefully recorded and disseminated, especially her revelations concerning the afterlife. In 1391, just over a decade after her death, she was canonized by Pope Boniface IX. More than 600 years later, in 1999, Pope John Paul II named her one of the 6 patron saints of Europe, alongside figures like Benedict, Cyril, and Methodius, and Edith Stein. Hers was no fringe voice. Her accounts were so detailed and precise that they were treated as testimony, not poetry. And among those accounts, none was more chilling than what she saw in purgatory. Purgatory, to many, remains a vague and misunderstood concept. Even among Catholics, confusion persists. It is not a place for the damned. It is not hell-light. It is, rather, a place for the saved, for those who died in God's grace but are not yet fully purified. Imagine entering the presence of infinite love, infinite beauty, infinite truth. No blemish can survive that brilliance. The closer one gets to divine light, the more every shadow stands out. The fire of purgatory is not revenge. It is purification, the fire of love consuming all that is unworthy, all that is impure. Most souls are not ready to meet God as they are. Sinful habits, unhealed wounds, unrepented attitudes, they remain clinging to the soul like dirt to cloth. Purgatory burns that away. And yes, it is painful, not because God is cruel, but because healing often is. Bridget's vision did not begin in comfort. She found herself at the edge of a vast, dark expanse. All around her were souls in different stages of suffering. Some were engulfed in flame, others suspended in cold, agonizing waters, still others trapped in silence, tormented by their own thoughts. All were suffering, but none protested. Each soul accepted their pain with a kind of solemn dignity. They knew it was just. They understood its purpose. It was there, among these burning souls, that Christ appeared to her not as a judge, not as an avenger, but as a teacher. His expression was solemn but gentle. He had come to show her something important. "Watch," he said, "and understand." Then she saw him, a man who appeared middle-aged, though age means little in that realm. He stood in the flames, not just surrounded, but penetrated by them. His suffering was deep, but his face showed no rebellion, only endurance. "This soul," Christ said, "has been here for 700 years. Bridget recoiled. 7 centuries. Longer than many empires. Longer than most churches had even existed. Longer than the time between Christ and Charlemagne. What could a man possibly have done to deserve such an extreme purification? She asked the question aloud. The answer was more disturbing than the vision. He complained. Christ said. Bridget didn't understand. Complained? About what? Everything, Christ answered. His whole life. He was ungrateful. He found fault with everything. I gave him his food, his family, his work, the weather, the church. He never saw the gifts, only the flaws. The Lord's voice darkened slightly. He poisoned every blessing with dissatisfaction. He turned joy into bitterness, and he taught others to do the same. This was the heart of the revelation. The sin was not spectacular. It was not dramatic. It was invisible, mundane, even respectable, but it was persistent, deep, and contagious. Complaining was not just a personal fault. It was a rejection of divine providence, a constant whisper to others that God's gifts were not good enough. And every time he spoke that poison, he infected those around him. His wife, who became bitter, his children, who learned cynicism, his neighbors, who caught his gloom like a disease. His sin did not end with him. Its effects rippled outward generationally, communally, spiritually, and so his purification would continue until not just his own soul was cleansed, but until all the consequences of his sin were fully accounted for. Here is where the lesson becomes clear. Divine justice is not about punishing what shocks us. It is about healing what harms others. And small, constant sins that ripple outward often do more damage than singular dramatic acts. The man who murdered in rage may have repented, confessed, and died a penitent. His purification, while intense, may be brief. But the man who lives 60 years in constant ungratefulness, whose every word subtly erodes the goodness in others, whose attitude drains joy from his household and hope from his friends, that man has created a vast field of damage, and that field must be purified. Every echo of complaint, every soul affected, every seed of negativity. This is not divine pettiness. It is spiritual ecology. What is planted must be harvested. What is damaged must be restored. As Bridget stood, absorbing the horror of what seemed like such a small sin turned into 7 centuries of flame, she began to realize this was not just about one man. It was about her, and about all of us. She had complained too about her duties, about the church, about discomfort and injustice. Was she, too, accumulating a debt? Was her soul also marked by these daily, invisible rejections of grace? Christ, seeing her fear, offered a reassurance but also a warning. Not all complaints are equal. There is a difference between honest lament and habitual bitterness, between acknowledging hardship and rejecting providence, between grief and grumbling. But when the heart becomes blind to gifts, when it lives only in what is lacking, when its words daily reject the good, then the soul begins to erode. And that erosion must one day be healed. So before this vision continues, before you learn what other souls Bridget saw in purgatory, and what determined their length of suffering, you must stop and ask yourself, what habits have you normalized? What harmless attitudes have you excused? What spiritual diseases have you passed to others through your words? Because purgatory is not merely a place of fire, it is a place of reckoning, of restoration, and the habits you build now will determine whether that purification takes 3 days or 700 years. The vision did not end with the declaration of 700 years. That number lingered in Bridget's mind like a wound that would not close. She remained standing beside Christ, still facing the suffering soul, when the space around them began to change. The flames receded, not extinguished, but dimmed, and the darkness reshaped itself into images. Christ was about to show her something deeper, something far more unsettling than the length of the punishment. He was about to show her how that punishment had been earned, not in a single dramatic moment, but slowly, quietly, over the course of an ordinary human life. You have heard the reason, he said. Now you must see it. Then, gold. Bridget found herself watching the man's life unfold, not as memory records it, but as heaven weighs it. She saw a modest household, comfortable by the standards of the time, not wealthy, not destitute. There was food on the table, work to be done, children playing in the background, the kind of life most people would call a blessing. The man entered the scene, weary from the day, and sat down to eat. His wife had prepared the meal with care, rising early, working with tired hands. For a moment, there was silence. Then the complaint came. The food was plain. The portion was small. The same meal again. Nothing dramatic. Nothing cruel. Just a sigh. A word. A tone. But Bridget saw what the man never noticed. She saw the light in his wife's face dim, just slightly. A small wound opened, invisible to him, but real, and she saw angels mark it. The scenes continued. Each complaint seemed trivial on its own. The weather was wrong, too hot, too cold. The work was tedious, the neighbors irritating, the children noisy, the priests dull, the sermons too long. The Mass inconvenient, always something, always dissatisfaction, never gratitude. Bridget expected to see moments of balance, moments where the man softened, repented, or gave thanks, but they never came. Christ spoke again, his words heavy but calm. He did not complain once, he said. He complained always. And he never thanked me. Not once, not in sickness or in health, not in youth or age. He received my gifts and immediately counted their flaws. There's first, what disturbed Bridget most was not the man's tone, but the effect. Each complaint spread outward like ink in water. His wife began to dread her work, knowing it would never satisfy. His children learned early that life was something to endure, not to cherish. Gratitude never took root in them because they never saw it modeled. Bridget saw them grow into adults who found fault easily, who carried dissatisfaction into their own marriages and friendships. The man's neighbors began to avoid him, not because he was openly cruel, but because his presence drained joy. A single voice, repeated daily for decades, reshaped an entire emotional landscape. Christ's voice cut through the images. Sin is never isolated. What poisons the heart also poisons the community. God, Bridget began to understand. Complaining was not merely a failure of manners or patience. It was a rejection of divine order. When the man complained about the food, he rejected providence. When he complained about the weather, he criticized creation. When he complained about people, he dismissed the souls God had placed in his life for mutual sanctification. Each complaint was a quiet declaration, "This gift is not good enough." And because the man spoke these declarations aloud, he taught others to see the world the same way. His sin multiplied because it reproduced itself in other hearts. This, Christ said, is why the debt is so large. He did not suffer alone. He made others suffer with him. 2:1. Bridget felt a growing unease. She had always thought of sin in terms of rules broken, laws violated, acts committed. This was different. This was sin as atmosphere, as influence, as slow corrosion. She saw years pass in moments. The man aged. His complaints never softened. Even as his body weakened, his dissatisfaction sharpened. He never paused to ask why joy eluded him. He never examined his own heart. Confession, when it came, was shallow. He confessed obvious faults, but never this one. He excused it as personality. Das realism, as honesty, and so it followed him to the grave. Unrepented, unhealed, Christ turned to Bridget, as if anticipating her objection. "You think this is small," he said, "but consider what he refused." He showed her the blessings the man had ignored. Health preserved through years when others died young. Children spared when neighbors buried theirs. Food on the table during lean seasons. Faith offered freely. Sacraments available. Forgiveness always within reach. None of these gifts were denied him, but he never received them with joy. He never returned love for love. Gratitude, Christ explained, is not politeness. It is truth. To give thanks is to acknowledge reality as gift. To complain habitually is to live in a lie. To see abundance as lack. He lived as if he were deprived, Christ said, and so deprivation became his interior reality. If we contented to a lever, the vision shifted again. Bridget now saw the man at the moment of death. There was no dramatic repentance, no sudden awakening. He died as he lived, dissatisfied, distracted, unaware of the weight he carried. Judgment came swiftly. There was no condemnation to hell. He had loved God in his way. He had avoided grave sin, but when his soul was exposed to divine light, the truth burned. The habits he had normalized now stood, revealed as chains. The damage he had caused others pressed upon him, not as accusation, but as clarity. He saw, for the first time, every small wound his words had inflicted, every joy he had stolen, every seed of bitterness he had planted, and he accepted the sentence. Purgatory was not imposed against his will. He walked into it, knowing it was necessary. Bridget's heart trembled as she realized how easily such a fate could be shared. This was not a story about monsters. It was about ordinary people, about kitchens and tables and conversations that seemed harmless. Christ spoke once more. clarifying what she must understand before the vision moved on. "It was not one complaint," he said. "It was thousands. Habitual sin engraves itself into the soul. Each repetition deepens the mark, and when the soul leaves the body, those marks remain. The fire of purgatory did not burn because God was angry. It burned because the soul needed to be reshaped, its grooves smoothed, its habits undone. As the images faded and the flames of purgatory returned to view, Bridget understood that the 700 years were not symbolic. They were proportionate. 60 years of daily negativity had created a mountain of distortion, and mountains take time to level. The man's purification continued not because God delayed mercy, but because mercy required complete healing, and until the last trace of ingratitude was burned away, until the last echo of his influence was accounted for, the fire would continue its work. Bridget stood in silence, overwhelmed by the implication. If such a common habit could result in centuries of purification, what of all the others humanity excuses so easily? What of sharp words, cold indifference, quiet selfishness? The vision was not meant to terrify her into despair. It was meant to awaken her, and through her, to awaken others, because the man in the fire could no longer change his past. But those still living could. The question that now pressed upon her soul was unavoidable. If complaining could do this, what habits was she still carrying that she had never named as sin? After Bridget absorbed the gravity of the man's sin and the years of purifying fire he had earned, Christ did not let the lesson rest. He turned to her and said, "Let me show you more." And with those words, the vision expanded. What had begun as a focus on one tormented soul now unfolded into a panorama of purgatory, filled with countless others, each in their own stage of suffering, each revealing a deeper truth about what shortens or lengthens a soul's stay in this place of healing. The next soul Bridget saw surprised her even more than the first, not because of how long it had remained in purgatory, but because of how briefly, 3 days. That was all. The soul of a woman, a peasant by appearance. Her dress was simple, her hands scarred by labor. Even in this spiritual state, Bridget could sense the weight of a hard life carried for many years. Christ explained, "This woman lived in poverty. She buried 3 of her 6 children before they reached adulthood. Her husband was often sick and could not work. She carried the burdens of her family." Bridget looked at the soul and expected bitterness, sorrow, exhaustion. Instead, she saw peace. The woman, Christ continued, had every reason to be bitter. Her life was marked by suffering, loss, and unrelenting toil. But she did not complain. Every morning, she thanked God for the breath in her lungs. Every evening, she praised him for whatever food was on the table, even if it was stale bread. When her children died, she wept. But she also said, "The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be his name." Her pain was real, but her heart was turned upward. She offered her sufferings not as curses, but as prayers for the souls in purgatory, for the conversion of sinners, for the healing of the world. Her life had become an unending litany of offerings. Bridget was stunned. She had expected purgatory to operate like a courtroom, with sinners arranged by legal severity. But what she saw was a moral economy far more mysterious and exacting. This peasant woman had likely been unnoticed in life. No fame, no wealth, no theological education. Yet her time in purgatory was shorter than a single week. Christ said softly, "There is little to purify in her. She has already been refined by suffering, freely embraced. Her gratitude has consumed most of the residue. Only the faintest imperfections remain." And Bridget understood the fire of suffering, when accepted with love, purified far more powerfully than any punishment. The vision continued. Now Bridget saw a man who had been wealthy, his clothes fine, his home grand. He had given large sums to charity. His name was inscribed on the walls of hospitals and schools. But his face, now, was tense with sorrow. He had been in purgatory for over 100 years. Christ explained. He gave much, but he gave for praise. He wanted his name spoken. He wanted his generosity admired. He loved the reputation of goodness more than goodness itself. His money had helped many, but his motives had poisoned the gifts. His purification was now purging the vanity that had twisted his good works. Bridget saw the danger, that even charity, when done for self, could become a chain instead of a key. Then she saw a woman. Her tongue had not spoken lies. She had not gossiped. She had not slandered. But her truth was sharp, too sharp. She told others their faults without mercy, their flaws without softness. Her corrections were cold. Her righteousness was weaponized. Christ said, she believed she was helping, but she wounded without love. She was right in what she said, but wrong in how she said it. Now she must feel what her words caused in others. And Bridget saw the woman in purgatory reliving her words, but from the other side, feeling the sting, the shame, the discouragement they had planted in others. She was being purified by the experience of her victims, not as revenge, but as revelation. Then came a priest. He had been faithful. He had said Mass, heard confessions, taught doctrine, but his eyes had been tired, his heart unengaged. He had done what was required, nothing more. Christ said, he handled sacred things as if they were common. He preached truth, but never wept for souls. He confessed sins, but never truly carried the penitent's burden. His fire was faint, and now he must be set ablaze not by wrath, but by love so fierce it burns away indifference. Bridget felt sorrow for him. He had not been wicked, but he had been lukewarm, and that, perhaps, was worse, because he had stood so close to grace and remained unmoved. Another soul appeared, a mother. She had loved deeply, even fiercely, but her love was possessive. She wanted her children to be reflections of herself. She made their decisions. She clung to them. She controlled their paths. Christ said, her love was real, but disordered. She claimed what belonged to me, and in purgatory, she was learning to let go, learning to bless her children's freedom, learning that love must give space. Her suffering was not fire, but separation. She was learning to trust God with what she once clutched tightly. And then Bridget saw a man whose life, at first glance, seemed uneventful. He had not committed great sins. He had not even caused much pain, but he had done almost nothing of worth. He had been lazy, not destructively, but passively. He did the minimum in all things. In work, he avoided excellence. In family, he avoided sacrifice. In faith, he coasted. He lived, but never truly engaged. His soul, in purgatory, was cramped and stiff like muscles unused. His suffering was different, not burning, but stretching. He was being forced to engage, to feel, to wake up. And Bridget realized even mediocrity must be purified. After witnessing all this, Bridget turned to Christ and asked, Lord, what determines the length of purification? He replied, with a clarity that etched itself into her soul. There are several factors. First, the depth of attachment. A sin committed once in weakness is lighter than one committed until it becomes habit. Habit engraves grooves on the soul, and those grooves must be smoothed. Second, the harm done to others. A private sin is more easily healed than one that ripples outward. The man who complained harmed not just himself, but everyone around him. Third, the knowledge with which the sin was committed. To sin in ignorance is one thing, to sin knowingly is graver. That is why priests and leaders, who know more, are judged more strictly. Fourth, the failure to repent and repair. A sin acknowledged, confessed, and repaired needs less purification than one denied. And fifth, he said, with a solemn pause, the prayers of the living souls in purgatory cannot help themselves, but the living can. Zero's log. Bridget was shaken, not by wrath, but by precision. She saw that divine justice was not arbitrary, it was like fire, revealing the truth of things. No detail was missed, no motive ignored, but no virtue forgotten either. The woman who had suffered silently was lifted quickly. The priest who had gone through the motions was refined until he could burn with love. Every soul received what was needed, not one moment more, not one moment less. She had been given a glimpse not only into purgatory, but into God's mind. And what she saw changed her forever. She now understood that sins are not just violations, they are disfigurements. And purgatory is the surgery that heals what earth never did. Some surgeries are short, others take centuries, but all lead, eventually, to joy, unless the soul has no one to pray for it. Then the healing slows. Then the fire burns longer. And that truth leads into the final part of Bridget's vision. The part that concerns not only the dead, but the living. Bridget stood in the midst of souls burning, stretching, waiting. Each one told a story. Each one revealed a truth. But none of it mattered. She realized, if those still living ignored the lesson, she turned to Christ with a question every soul longs to ask, but few dare to voice. Lord, how can we avoid a long purification? What can we do now? Tumen, while we still have time? The answer was both simple and demanding, both freeing and terrifying. It would not require wealth or power or brilliance. It would require heart and choice. First, Christ said, practice gratitude every day. Not a formula, not a polite routine, but a sincere, conscious act. Thank me for what you have, he said, not what you wish you had. This was the foundational lesson, the one the complaining man had never learned. Gratitude is not naive optimism. It is spiritual clarity. It opens the eyes of the soul to the gifts already present, no matter how small. If my people thanked me sincerely each day, he said, half of purgatory would be emptied, because gratitude purifies while we live. It burns away complaint. It softens pride. It restores the gaze of the soul to the giver, not just the gifts. Second, he said, repair what you can. Sins confessed but never repaired linger like unpaid debts. If we've harmed someone, we must seek forgiveness. If we've created division, we must build bridges. If we've damaged others emotionally, spiritually, materially, we must act. Every debt paid on earth, Christ explained, is a debt that need not be paid in purgatory. These are not symbolic acts. They are real spiritual transactions. Just as a broken window needs to be mended physically, a wounded soul must be tended relationally. Christ did not say the repairs must be perfect, but they must be genuine. Effort is what counts, and intention. Third, he continued, accept your sufferings. Every trial, every pain, every setback can become a purgation if embraced with trust. This does not mean seeking suffering. It means refusing to waste it. What you endure now, he said, can be offered freely so that it need not be imposed later. The saints understood this. They embraced difficulty not because they loved pain, but because they saw what it did. It burned away pride. It humbled the spirit. It loosened the grip on the world. To suffer well in this life is to prepay the fire. It is to choose healing when it still counts as merit, not just consequence. Fourth, Christ said, pray for the dead. Bridget saw this as more than a suggestion. It was a spiritual lifeline. Many souls, he said, suffer longer than they must because no one remembers them. These souls wait in silence, forgotten by the world, though they once laughed, worked, raised families, wept in churches. They cannot help themselves. Their time for merit has passed. But the prayers of the living masses, rosaries, indulgence, acts of charity offered in their name become golden keys. Those who remember the suffering Christ promised will be remembered when they suffer. The mercy we offer will be returned. Then Christ spoke of the sacraments. Receive them, he said, with devotion. Confession not only forgives sins, it erases some of their punishment. The Eucharist unites us to his sacrifice, applying his merits to our wounds. Indulgences, properly disposed, can erase punishment entirely. These are not spiritual shortcuts. They are gifts of the Church, drawn from the treasury of grace won by Christ and the saints. None of this, he added, is complicated. All of it is available to anyone who desires it. Yet many neglect it, out of fear, out of pride, out of forgetfulness. But the souls in purgatory, Christ said, would give anything to return to earth for one day, one confession, one Mass, one sincere prayer of gratitude. We have that chance. They don't. Then Christ showed Bridget one final thing. She had seen suffering. She had seen sorrow. Now, he showed her release. A soul, purified, had come to the end of its fire. The flame stopped. The darkness lifted. The chains broke. And the soul looked up to see not judgment, but light, not searing light, but warm, golden light. The light of home. Angels gathered around it, not to interrogate, but to escort. Bridget saw the soul ascend, and on its face, she saw something unforgettable. Joy, pure joy, so deep that it erased all memory of pain, so full that the centuries of suffering now seemed like nothing, like mist before the morning sun. Christ turned to her. This, he said, awaits every soul who endures. No matter how long the purification, it ends. And when it ends, what remains is joy. He paused, but they would all tell you this. If they could, use your time now. Accept the smaller fire. Practice the smaller penance. Do the smaller acts of love. It will save you centuries. Bridget knew what she must do. From that day, she tracked every complaint before it reached her tongue. She thanked God not only for blessings, but for trials. She wrote down the names of the dead and prayed for them daily. And she never forgot what she had seen, the suffering, the healing, and the joy. She recorded everything, not as myth, but as witness, so that you, centuries later, would see what she saw. The man who complained for 60 years is still a warning. Perhaps his purification is now complete. Perhaps not. But his story endures because many souls live as he did, focused only on what is lacking, blind to what is given. Bridget's vision is not about fear. It is about freedom. You are still alive. Your time is not over. You still have the power to shape your eternity. So begin now. Practice gratitude, even for the things you wish were different. Repair relationships, even the awkward ones. Offer your pain, even the small kind. Pray for the forgotten dead, those who wait and wait, hoping for one act of mercy. Go to confession with honesty. Receive the Eucharist with awe, and remember that every act of love, every word of thanks, every moment of humility shortens the fire and lengthens the joy. Someday, you will be where they are, waiting, hoping, needing prayers. And what you do now will be what helps you then. The soul who gave thanks in prison will find heaven open. The soul who spread gratitude will be welcomed with song. And the soul who prayed for others will be lifted by others. Bridget saw what awaits the grateful. She saw what delays the bitter. And she left her visions for one reason, so you would know the difference while there is still time. You still have time.